So this video is going to be our intro to Nuke, which is the primary software we use in compositing. Uh, Nuke starts as an empty script looking like this. We have sort of four different areas in the program. The very top here we have our viewer, so this is where we're going to see our images. It has a timeline beneath it. Just like most other software that you might see, you can scrub along the timeline, play, pause, forward and backward, etc. Just beneath that, we have our node graph. Everything in Nuke is represented by a node. So any operation we're going to do, any image we're going to read in, will have a node on the node graph. We end up plugging these in together to manipulate things using more nodes. On the right side here, we have our properties bin. Anytime we do something with the node graph and anytime we want to change a setting on something, that's going to be done in the properties bin. If I quickly bring in a node, we have a blur node, we can blur things. There'll be a properties for the blur. It tells us at the top here what that node is that the properties for. So there'll be sliders sometimes, there'll be numbers, all sorts of different things, but then the properties bin is where we will change those settings. I'm just going to press delete to delete the node. The fourth area in Nuke is the very left side here. We have a bar that contains all our tools. So each of these icons is a different group of tools. Starting from the top, there's read and write nodes. So when we read in an image, this is where we're going to bring it from. Similarly, when we render something out, we're going to write it out. They're all organized into different groups based on the type of operation it is. So there's color things keying things here. There's filter category. There's a transform category, layering category, etc. So they're all referenced by these images here. Another way to bring in the nodes, if you right-click on the node graph, all those same categories are listed here, starting with image, with the read and the write. And then here, they're exactly the same categories, just with a text label rather than an image. If you know what node you're looking for, you can press tab in the node graph and you can start typing it. So if I want a blur node, I can start typing blur and bring it in that way as well. I mentioned using this to read in images. So if we're bringing in an image, I will go in here. So read, and then I'll navigate to the image I want to bring in. In this case, I'm bringing in a QuickTime file. I'll press open, and then we now have a node in our node graph that represents that image or QuickTime or sequence of images that we're reading in. If we want to view it in the viewer now, because we have it here as a thumbnail and we have the properties for it, tells us the path to it, the type of file, our resolution. If we want to view this in the viewer node that's in our node graph already has an input of a little dotted line with a 1 on it. Any nodes that we select, if we press a number key on it, so if I press the number 1 key, it's going to plug in the viewer input 1. And now we see that in the viewer node, in the viewer here. It'll tell us here what we're viewing as well. I can have different viewer inputs plugged into different things so that I can see or jump between different things. So reading in files, this is how we'll do it. The read category here, and it will give us a node for that file on the timeline. As a separate thing, to save our Nuke file, we'll go up to the File dialog and say Save Comp. Saving our comp is different than rendering an image. It's actually saving the file just like you'd save a PSD from Photoshop. This is saving the Nuke file, and again, we can tell it where we want to save it. So I will save this as tutorial, and I'll press enter. And now it's saved it as tutorial.nk, and that summarizes our first tutorial for Nuke.